It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Stephen Morris, who is a retired industrial chemist with more than 30 years of experience in the petrochemical industry across Europe and Australia. His deep concern for environmental degradation and rising social inequality led him to become actively involved in Sustainable Population Australia, SPA, where he currently serves as the South Australian branch president. Born in Scotland, and you'll hear the lovely Scottish brogue when he talks, Dr. Morris, brings a strong scientific background and extensive business experience to his advocacy work. He is committed to exploring the links between population growth, environmental impact, and economic pressures, and is a frequent speaker on these themes. Beyond SPA, he is a long-standing supporter of several environmental organisations, including the Australian Conservation Foundation, the Climate Control, and the Australian Institute, and has contributed to the John Muir Trust since 1989. An avid outdoor man, Stephen enjoys bushwalking and has completed multiple long-distance treks, including the Tour de Mont Blanc. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Stephen Morris.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. Let me just get organised. Thank you for the introduction. I might just start with some comments on Sustainable Population Australia and who we are. We're non-partisan, so we're not a political party, but to get anything done, you have to involve politics at some stage, but we're non-partisan. We're a not-for-profit environmental group. We advocate for increased awareness of the limits and impacts of the Australian population from the viewpoints of ecology, economy and social equity. But you will hear some comments today about global population issues. And we reject any immigration selection based on race, ethnicity or religion. It's just the numbers we're concerned about. Today, I'll ask you a few questions. Some of them are very easy. I don't think you'll have any trouble with them, but some might not be so obvious. And they certainly weren't obvious to me more than 5 years ago, before I became involved with Sustainable Population Australia. Basically, in the early days of COVID, I started looking at environmental groups because I wanted to be involved in one locally, because it's the right thing to do. But all the environmental groups I could see, they somehow, and I couldn't work it out, they were missing the point. So for example, they could plant lots of trees and grow off the forest and bush, but then urban development could come along based on government policy to grow the population, and it'd all be destroyed. So eventually I came across Sustainable Population Australia, and I thought, this is perhaps the underlying reason for a lot of our environmental problems. So I slowly get more involved with them. And our group now, we do submissions to state studies, for example, the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan Authority. I should say though, so far, they've all been ignored because no one will talk about population. It's taboo. So today, there's 8 questions and a few slides to support it. And please ask questions as we go along. Sorry to interrupt your lunch if that's the case, but it'd be good to have a chat about it, and maybe at a later date, if if I'm invited, it would be lovely to come back and give you more details of the effects of us on the environment. So I'll start with question. Might help if I turned it on. Question number 1. Worldwide, the human population increases each year by how much? So you get A, 4 million, then 25 million, 70 million, 150 million, 400 million. Now, the reason I asked this question is you've probably read a lot about how the world population is going to decline imminently. And there's certain big business people like Elon Musk worried that the human population will go extinct in the near future, in spite of him having 14 kids. And it's strange to see that many of the people saying we will have a population crisis forget to mention that certainly when I was born in 1961, there were 3 billion people on the earth. Now there's 8.3 billion people on the earth. In the year 1800, there were 1 billion people on the earth. And about 10,000 years ago, the estimate is there was about 500,000 people on the earth. So our numbers are historically high. And even in many developed countries, well, probably about half the developed countries, the population is still increasing slowly. But there's large population increases, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where women might have 5, 6 kids. Anyway, anyone want to venture a reply for this one? Right, so we got about. This man is correct, 70 million. Spot on. So, thank you. So it's been round about 70 or 80 million a year increase, which is about 1% a year globally. For the last 20 years, the growth rate fell a bit during the 90s, which led some people to think that population would decline. But it has continued to increase. And it started rising again about the year 2000 for about 10 years after family planning programs were pulled back in certain parts of the world. And I don't know the details off the top of my head, but some of that might be happening again because overseas development aid has been reduced. For example, under the Trump presidency, they're not offering money. And part of that overseas foreign aid is towards family planning. So the other thing to keep in mind with this 70 million a year, we hear, certainly in Australia, that women, the term is total fertility rate, which is the number of children per woman. And the total fertility rate for Australian women is now under 1.5 children, which is way beneath replacement rate. Replacement rate isn't 2 as I once thought, it's 2.1 because there's slightly more boys born than women. So if we didn't have large-scale immigration in Australia, our population would eventually stabilise, then decline. But the thing to keep in mind that if today the fertility rate is beneath replacement rate, in other words, fewer kids are being born, it takes 40 years of that girl's or woman's life before reproduction stops. So a low fertility rate today will take about 40 years before it has its full effect. Okay, so if we move on to our, if we move on to our supporting slide, which is the global population, the UN every year publish what their population projections are, and they do predict that within 30, 40 years, the world population will start declining. But the main figure that's published and discussed is the mean figure of their population projection. So there could be a quicker decline in global population, or it could keep increasing if certain factors happen, like governments and government policy toward reproduction and encouraging more births. So let's say current projections are around about 10 billion, 10.5 billion. Hopefully will be the peak, and then it will decline. Now, that is also 2 billion more people, 2 billion more people consuming resources, requiring farmland, burning fuels. And the world population was 2 billion round about the year 1900. We're expecting a further increase of that number, of that magnitude. The other comment on this, one of our Queensland committee has looked at UN projections over the last 40 years and found that every UN projection, in fact, underestimates the global population. And there's one comment here that 253 million more people were there in the world in mid-2022 than the UN predicted in year 2000. So that's quite a few people, considering there's 28 million in Australia. Right, next question. Are you ready? This is an easy one. So 70 million is equivalent to adding another country the size of New Zealand, South America, Australia, Russia, United Kingdom. Yeah, I'm not sure we would want another 70 million New Zealanders, but that's another story. And most of these 70 million people go into urban slums in Africa and the Middle East and a few places in Asia. So they don't have a great life. Okay. Excuse me. Question number 3. Which of these developed countries had the highest pre-COVID pandemic growth rate? The USA, Canada, Italy, Australia, or Germany? This one's a bit harder. USA? Any others? USA? Italy? Oh, well, that's definitely wrong. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's actually Australia. And look, part of today is really just to throw some facts at you. These numbers came from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It's not like some group made them up. You can look at the ABS, and all these slides, they've got multiple references just to cross-check. So in the decade pre-COVID, Australia was the fastest growing. They're probably, like, you could argue that one country was faster growing than Australia, and that was Luxembourg. But Luxembourg's only got, I think it's 2 or 3 million people. It's a tax haven, and it attracts people, mainly rich people, who want to live there and not pay tax. It's a bit different from a normal country. So from 2003 to 2009, our population growth rate increased from 1% per annum to 2% per annum. Now, that 1% doesn't sound a lot. However, if you work out the maths or the arithmetic, 1% growth per annum means a doubling of the population in 72 years. So the rule of thumb is you take 72, divide by the percentage. So a 2% growth rate means a doubling of Australia's population from 28 million to 56 million in 35 years. Where are they going to go? Where's the water coming from? And it might well be, where's the food coming from if we have an El Nino and affects farms? If you cover farms in urban sprawl, which is happening down south and up north in Anglevale and down in Aldinga, the farmland disappears. There's got to be limits here. So during the 2010-2020 decade, Australia's population growth averaged 1.6, so that's a doubling in about 45, 50 years. So that's why we're building a tunnel in South Road, although South Australia growth rate isn't as high as the eastern states, but there is growth now. I just read ahead this week that South Australia was the only state with quite a dramatic increase in house prices in the last quarter. That's partly tied in with demand. It has to be any of you who are in business, demand and supply. If the demand's high and the supply's fixed, prices go up. But the government won't talk about demand. Yeah, well, good question. So, of all the growth in our, I mean, I'm an immigrant. Australia needs immigrants. We don't say no immigrants. But in the last 20 years, more than half of our population growth is due to immigration. The other half is natural increase, which is births exceeding deaths. In 2023, I think there's data coming up, 2023 to 2024, 73% of our population growth rate was due to immigration. So it's quite a high percentage. And I won't go into it today, but if we have a few immigrants, then we assimilate, right? Maybe one day I'll speak with an Australian accent, I don't know, right? But if we have large-scale immigration, and I know, like I've lived in French Canada, I've lived in Geneva, people who speak a language stick with their own kind. The English-speaking people did it where I lived. It's just human nature. So if you have large-scale immigration, they don't assimilate quite so well. It's harder. So yeah, so that gives you an idea. Yeah. So there was one country with the other country apart from Luxembourg that I should have mentioned is Israel. They've got what's called pronatalism, which is a fancy word for saying they want people to have lots of babies because it means there's more of their people in Israel. And one very sad fact, and one reason there were so many children killed in Gaza was that both Israel and Gaza, since think it was 1948, correct me if I'm wrong, when Israel was formed, just after the Second World War. Both regions have increased their population fivefold. So there's a lot more people. There's a very high proportion of young people. Whereas Australia, old versus young, it might be the same proportion. In those countries, old it's like a pyramid, and there's a very large young population. The other point to mention is Canada. Canada, a couple of years ago, had a very high population growth rate, but under Mark Carney, who you might know was a Canadian who was the governor of the Reserve Bank in England, or the Bank of England. He has cut back on immigration to Canada, and I've got Scottish Canadian relatives, so I keep my eye on it. House prices have stabilised, rents have dropped, so it's not happening here. So now this is just a comment on Australia's population. It's maybe not very clear, but if we look through the numbers, in the European Union area, from 2000 to 2024, the EU population grew 8%. The OECD total was 17%. The US, because some of you thought the US was the fastest growing, was 22%. The UK was 16%. New Zealand, God forbid, was 30% growth rate. So there'll be a few people speaking with funny vowels. But you can blame that one on the Scots, right? Canada, 36, and Australia grew 45%. When I moved to Australia in 1994, the population of Australia was about 18 million. Now it's 10 million more. That's the size of Sydney and Melbourne combined extra. Okay, question number 4. I think I've answered this one already for you, so I'll just give you, I won't ask you, but if Australia's population, how long would it take Australia's population to double at 2005 growth rates of 1.5%? Well, it would be about 40 to 60 years. Yeah. I've just introduced a bit of a technical term here called net overseas migration, which is immigration minus emigration. So usually there's about 100,000 Australians decide to go back or to go back where they came from, or they live overseas for an extended period. So a net overseas migration of about 300,000 means we've got 400,000 immigrants and about 100,000 emigrants. Yeah, and then of course you've got births and deaths to work out the total population. So I'll move on to this slide. Now, a few comments. It's a bit of a complicated slide, but it shows here that in 2020, 2021, I think you all know we couldn't move in Australia, Fortress Australia. We had very few people coming to live here from overseas, and some people left and went back to live overseas. And then immediately after COVID, we had a huge increase in immigration to about 650,000, and again with about 100,000 leaving. So at that time in 2023, Australia's population grew close to 600,000 in 1 year. That's when house prices really took off. There's tax reasons as well. But, the other thing to note here, and this graph doesn't show it very well, but from post-war, Second World War, 1950 until 2002, the average immigration rate to Australia was about 80,000 a year. It went up and down a bit. So we had an increase in immigration immediately post-war due to taking refugees, which is the right thing to do. Then it averaged 80,000. Regardless of whether it's Liberal or Labour, under the Howard government, the immigration rate increased to about 250,000, and currently it's sitting more like 350,000. Right, question 5. I'll just do this one quickly, but some people have concerns about refugees making up a big proportion of our immigration. Refugees, I won't go into the numbers because I don't have time, but refugees make up 2 or 3% of our total immigration rate at about 15,000 a year. So it's a very small proportion. Question 6. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. On average, for every new immigrant, what do you think the cost of infrastructure for that immigrant is? So we'll get A, $2,000, B, 10,000, C, 60, D, 150,000, E, $500,000. Pardon? Well, look, she might not know anything. You might not know. There might be too many numbers in it for her. Sorry? Oh, I can't.
If I take 100,000,
yeah.
So that's a one-off cost.
Not well.
To bring in human capital into the country.
Yeah.
They will live 40 years.
Yeah.
So you're actually writing off that capital, human capital, over that period. So you can't, I think, evaluate it on this basis.
Yeah. I mean, what I don't know, because I can't remember, is over what period that money is invested, but I've got a memory that it's over a period of about 10, 15 years, because you don't build a road overnight, you don't build a hospital overnight. Yeah, I can't answer your question, but I looked, and my colleagues looked at studies under Infrastructure Australia, where they estimated their spend. That's the second reference. Treasury figures, and also within one of our discussion papers. So I'm sorry I can't answer that one. Any other comments on infrastructure? Yeah? Sorry? Yeah, they pay tax, quite right? No, that doesn't include that. That's just the upfront cost. Yeah. Or the cost for the infrastructure. Yeah. It was estimated in these studies at over 150,000 per person, which explains why we have extensive road building. For example, the duplication of the road down to Aldinga and Celtic Beach cost 880 million. That one, I think you can put a number on it. The tunnel on South Road, which, to be honest, probably should have something similar should have been done 30, 40 years ago. So it's probably long overdue. But all these things add up, and we've only got 2.5 million people here. Right. So we'll move on. Yep. Question 7. Excuse me. What's most affecting in reducing birth rates and population growth in underdeveloped countries? Well, we've got voluntary family planning, one-child policy, economic development, education for girls, and lowering infant mortality rate. They all have an influence, but the one that has been shown to have most effect is if you have fewer children first, you end up better off. Not the other way around, where you want economic development and therefore you will have fewer children. And there's been a number of studies on this. So it was the reverse of what I thought. And lastly, this is just a summary of ethically responsible strategies that reduce population growth. We believe women should be educated. It's a right. Pension schemes, yeah. So I'll stop on the last one. And this one is controversial. What's most effective in reducing carbon dioxide emissions? Driving an EV, taking public transport, using more efficient light bulbs, stop eating meat. Well, it's actually having one less child, because that child, over the lifetime and their descendants, will create more emissions. Sorry I went over time. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Stephen may well give a follow-up talk later in the year. We'll work on that. I'm sure there'll be a lot more things mentioned and a lot more questions there. I think we can assume that the question time has interwoven with the talk. So I'd like to thank Stephen very much for his talk. If you'll all stand and applaud.